Well, it's another very warm welcome back, all of my YouTube subscribers, and also if you're maybe visiting my channel for the very first time, then I hope you find something here to entertain you with regards to old vintage dirt bikes. Now, due to a continuing lockdown status here in Scotland, I'm still unable to travel to bring you brand new material, although thanks to my extensive video archives full of old classic dirt bikes, I've managed to attain more of those good looking motocrossers from around the paddocks during my travels in 2019. Now, first up, we are in Northern Ireland in June of 2019, and this is John McCartney's very nice looking 400 KTM. Now, I'm sure John's not related to the Beatles legend, of course, Paul McCartney, but nevertheless this is still a nice looking example of one of these Austrian built KTM twin shockers. Now, I might be guessing here, but I'm sure this is a 1981 model, and of course the little brother of the legendary 495 KTM, which was an absolute brute of a bike for its time. Now, this particular 400cc engine I'm not really familiar with, although its bigger 495 motor is well documented, and it still holds the record for being the fastest motocross bike on the planet, which was ridden by Rod Bush, who clocked a 495 KTM at just short of 124 miles per hour with a standard motor and just a change of front and rear sprockets. But you can see here that John's made a makeshift primary drive sprocket cover for his particular KTM, as this is a mandatory requirement when racing classic motocross in Northern Ireland. But this featured bike of John's appears to have all the right parts for one of these KTM twin shockers, and in particular this expansion chamber and tailpipe. Now, John's machine also looks like the bike has its original rear twin shocks, although apart from the change of handlebars, it still has that original 1981 KTM look. But essentially a very nice and very rare KTM machine. Once again, it appears to have the proper rear sprocket and that very nicely designed alloy swing arm with its alloy chain guide and brake torque arm still attached. Now, the bike's front fork gaiters are not a factory fitment, of course, although John's more than likely just added these to keep dirt and other debris from damaging the stanchions. But overall, despite one or two non-standard items, this is still a cracking looking 400 KTM. And as I said, it's a bike that is certainly seldom seen at classic or vintage race events, and come to think of it, you virtually never ever see a 495 either, but that's probably because they took a very special rider to tame them. And some would even say that the big 495 was just far too much bike for your average racer. But certainly a rare machine and rarely seen around the race paddocks in this modern time. That's John McCartney's very nice 400 KTM. Okay, next up it's the turn of Sam and Phil Nichols' very nice pair of 360 CZs, or CZs if you're that way inclined. Now, this lovely pair of bikes was spotted at the Cumberland Grand National in 2019, and both these bikes were just immaculately turned out on the day. Now, it's quite hard sometimes to put an actual year of manufacture on these modern day Czechoslovakian machines, as there are so many upgraded bits and pieces that you can buy for these bikes nowadays, and a lot of these older bikes can actually end up being a fully remanufactured racing machine by the time you're finished. But don't get me wrong, I'm not criticising them here, and it's great that so many new parts are available to keep these bikes on the track, and most parts are normally fitted to improve the handling or operation of the motor and the bike's suspension. Now, a little bit of improvisation here with these homemade bike stands, because with these underslung expansion chambers you can't just use a conventional telescopic stand, although it does bring back some memories of when I used an old lemonade crate to prop up my 440 Michael when I raced it. Now, more upgrades again with these billet alloy triple clamps, which will be of course lighter and possibly stronger than the originals. Now, once again, black wheels seem to be the new craze when it comes to building these old classics, but for me personally, you can't beat some nice polished alloy or a good bit of chrome. But then again, I'm from the old school when alloy and steel was the main materials on a scrambles bike. Now, a plastic fuel tank on these CZ machines, and as I recall, the seats also on these bikes back in the day were very comfy for an older machine. Now, this bike appears to still have its standard CZ forks and front brake hub, which in its day had decent stopping power as long as it was a dry race. Now, Phil looks like he's splashed out here and bought a brand new chain and sprockets for this race event. Good suspension is also required at this Cumberland racetrack, as it tends to be very bumpy here in the summertime. Now, a nice pair of wide foot pegs on Phil's race bike, although I've never really seen these as an upgrade as such. I've always seen these as a necessity on any type of dirt bike to help give the rider's feet just that little bit more support. Now, another exhaust upgrade is this nice replacement expansion chamber. Of course, CZ motorcycles always had the accolade of inventing the two-stroke expansion chamber, although it wasn't long after that when it was then copied and manufactured by the rest of the world. Now, this was an interesting bike that I captured at this very same Cumberland event. Now, it's a bike that I know absolutely nothing about, although I'm assuming it's an older Honda CR250, but it does look like it's a bit of a hybrid with a very strange frame and what looks like a Michael rear swing arm. And so maybe this is the time for all my YouTubers to shine and fill in all the gaps and specifications about what you can all decipher from these very short video clips. But the bike still looks the goods, mind you, and it looks like it could do a good job on the racetrack, but it would be very helpful if we could all find out a little bit more about it. But for me, the motor looks like it's unmistakably an XR Honda engine, although my first impressions are that it is more than likely a later power plant that's been slotted into this frame, which is another mystery on its own. Now, there could also be a chance that the motor and the frame are from the same year, although I'm sure that the forks and the swing arm are almost definitely from a different machine. But despite that, it all still seems to fit together just right. But this rear swing arm certainly looks to me like it's a Michael unit, and the rider has also bolted on a very nice pair of Öhlins piggyback shocks as well, so that's another nice touch to this bike. Now, black wheels once again as the current trend in vintage racing, And at first glance this rear hub looks like it's actually from a YZ Yamaha, but then again I'm just really guessing here. Now the forks once again are another part that I'm not very sure of, but don't forget to leave your observations in the comment section of the video, where we can then all read your own interpretations and views of what we're looking at here. Now more than likely there's a very good brap that comes from that megaphone tailpipe when that big 4-stroke Honda motor bursts into life. Although despite what the bike actually is, and it may even be a fully authentic machine that I've just never come across before, but it's still a very nice looking twin shock 4-stroke race bike. But my own guess is that it's a hybrid made up from several different motorcycles. But nevertheless, it's still a very good talking point, and certainly something that I personally would like to know more about, as I just couldn't find the owner on the day to get the required information. But it's certainly something different, that's for sure. Now parked right next to the 4-stroke Honda was this very nice 1978 CR250 Red Rocket, which was actually decked out in similar livery to the XR Honda, so they could have possibly been owned by the same person. But these 1978 Red Rockets were simply awesome machines when they were introduced to motocross racers in the late 1970s, and these 250s were certainly game changers when it came to racing on the track. Now the heart of the bikes were these 250 two-stroke motors, which had some of Honda's RC Works racer engines improvements used in its construction. Now the motor had a Works style barrel that had a chrome bore, which allegedly dissipated the heat better, although the downside was that you just couldn't rebore it, so you had to be very careful to keep the filter spotless clean at all times to keep any unwanted wear from ruining your engine. But this example is not a fully authentic 1978 bike, as it has had a replacement exhaust and tailpipe. But then again, most of these bikes have new parts on them, considering their age. But these 250 engines were very compact and lightweight, and not to mention very powerful for a small 250 two-stroke, which incidentally only weighed around 56 pounds. Now riders used to say that the low end power was quite tame, but once you spun it up into the mid-range, then you had to hold on, because that's where the bike earned its title as the Little Red Rocket. But of course these weren't the quickest 250s to get you off the line if you wanted to be whole shot Johnny, but once the motor hit its sweet spot, then it was just fast enough to outrun most of its 250cc competition. But when you look at these CR250s, it's not hard to see the resemblance from the Works bikes, as a lot of the bike's fixtures and fittings came straight off the factory Hondas, including of course this bright red paint scheme. Now once again, lightweight materials were used on this bike, with the front and rear backing plates and the bike's ignition cover, which were all manufactured from magnesium. Now another plus point on these 78 Hondas were that they had about 11 inches of travel on the back suspension and on the front, which was quite amazing when you consider that most of the bike's competition were only giving you about 9 inches in 1978. And in this shot you can see that lightweight magnesium brake backplate and that very strong steel Honda swing arm. Now these forks of course are not the original Showa forks from 1978, as it looks like our particular owner has went again for beefier, stronger units and fitted these Fox factory forks as a replacement. Now this bike looks to have kept the original fuel tank at least, although It's been added with personalised graphics from possible sponsors' logos on the side. But despite the non-original forks and the shocks and a few other non-stock items, this is still a cracking interpretation of a 1978 Red Rocket, and it's still a very purposeful looking classic or vintage twin shock race bike. Now, also captured at this same Cumberland race event is Graham Charlton's very nice 480 Honda twin shocker. Now, the information I managed to grab on the day from Graham was that the frame is a 1982 250 chassis and the motor is taken from a 1980 model. But as you can gather, it's another Honda hybrid. But yet again, it's still a very nice looking bike. Now, Graham has his own off-road motorcycle spares and repair dealership in Stockton-on-Tees in the UK, so he'll certainly know his way around these big Hondas, and as you would expect, he'll also know how to put them all together. And once again, these big 480 two-stroke Honda motors are extremely popular with vintage and twin shock racers around the globe. Now, these 480s again had quite good front suspension for 1982, but this 480 52 horsepower Honda motor was just the star of the show for its time, with once again magnesium used in its construction to keep the overall weight of the bike to a minimum. Now, these 480s had quite a long alloy swing arm, as I remember, but it was still very strong and very light for a bike from 1982. Now, Graham's particular Honda is certainly not short in the rear suspension department, and there must be at least 12 inches of travel from those very nice Öhlins rear shocks. Now, another nice upgrade on Graham's machine is this very high quality D&G expansion chamber and tailpipe to complement what is already a very nice looking machine, which again has been very tastefully put together by Graham. Okay, last but certainly not least, an almost 100% original 1979 Montesa Cappra 250. Now, the story behind this particular bike goes that this bike had been locked away in a container for many years prior to this current owner purchasing it. But this Montesa still has all the original parts that were fitted to the bike in 1979. Now, the motor is as it was in 1979. As far as I'm aware, this has never been dismantled or repaired for any reason. Now, the 250 engine still has its original Bing carburetor, its alloy gear shifter, and of course its original expansion chamber, which is very rare indeed. But of course, this bike has been fitted with a brand new drive chain, but then again, would you want to take a chance on taking a bike onto the track with a 40-year-old chain driving the back wheel? But I have to say, it's not often that you get old machines like this resurfacing and a new owner putting it back on the track, but most bikes in this condition get the full-on bling treatment and then get placed into collections, so fair play to the new owner for wanting to race it on the track. But there is one part that's fitted to this bike that's not original, and that's these handlebars that are currently fitted to the machine, although the owner still has the originals, and it's just that these new Renthals offered him a better riding position than the ones that were fitted. Now, I'm not entirely sure if welding this front axle clamp was the thing to do if you're racing the bike on a track, although I suppose it's still cheaper than trying to get hold of a brand new fork leg. Drum brakes again for 1979, which surprisingly had a grease nipple on the back plate. Now, a quite substantial plastic fuel tank on this bike, which had the Montesa name cast into the plastic, which naturally did away with trying to make those nasty stick-on graphics adhere to the outside. Now, a steel swing arm for 1979. As I mentioned, this bike still has its original wheels and spokes from that particular year, but the swing arm was very strong and very tough and had little in terms of flexing when it was put under a heavy load. Now, the bike's original rear sprocket, once again, although as you know that drive chain is a brand new replacement. Now, the bike again sports its original plastics, and once again the Montesa logo is stamped on the top of the mudguards, which speaks volumes for its authenticity. The seat again looks like it's come straight from the factory, but most of the bike's other controls like the grips, the cables, the levers, etc. are all stock items from back in the day, and it's great to see that these are all still intact and ready to go to work once again. But nevertheless, it's still a quite rare and very good example of a 1979 Montesa 250, and it's quite exceptional to find one in this kind of condition, with more or less all of its original bits and pieces still intact. But Montesas in general are very rare race bikes at these vintage and twin shock race meetings, and for some strange reason you just don't see many of them taking part in the actual racing, although some can be seen as show bikes or at a concourse motorcycle show. But this is a very nice and quite a rare bike to actually find at this Scottish Classic meeting that I attended in June of 2019. So we've had a quick look around the bike. Let's see if the brand new owner of this machine can get this 1979 bike fired into life. Well, there you have it. I hope you've enjoyed this latest selection of bikes from around the paddocks of 2019. So don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more of these vintage iron machines. So until next time, please stay safe until we speak once again here on Classic Dirt Bike TV. This video was brought to you in association with WorldSport, the world's #1 supplier for all your off-road and leisure sportswear. Just visit their online website for more information.